The Christmas music is unlike any other music, and we've had the best of it here at Pioneer Drive. I want to be always mindful that we don't take that for granted. So blessed. Thank you. I'll be the first, I hope, to say Happy New Year to you. We're 37 hours away from the new year, just around the corner. Jeff's talking about New Year's resolutions. Somebody said New Year's resolutions are like babies that cry in church. They need to be carried out in order to be any good. I didn't say that, but I've heard it said. It's probably some mean old Baptist preacher that came up with that one. We don't mind crying babies at Pioneer Drive unless they're sitting next to us, and then it gets a bit. But good day. 37 hours. It'll be a new month. It'll be a brand new year. The title, the name January, comes from the Roman god Janus, who was a two-faced deity. And you recall, with one face, Janus looks back on the previous year and the lessons learned and the blessings received. And then with the other face, looks to the new year and what that year holds and all the promise and all the hope of that year. And so today we come to worship in much the same way. We're looking back at the Old Testament as we've been walking our way through God's story for these last 15, 16, 17 weeks since mid-September. And today we're in chapter 14 of that book, The Story. We're in chapter 12 of 1 Kings. So let me encourage you to open your Bibles to 1 Kings as we begin to look to January and look to the new year and see what God has in store for us. But we also are looking back into God's Word and seeing how He was at work in the nation of Israel and in the lives of the people of that day. As we look back on 2018, we see some miracles that have taken place at Pioneer Drive. We had one of those miracles was sitting in church Tuesday night, or rather Monday night, Christmas Eve service, and was here this morning in the 9 a.m. service. Jackie Campbell. We were with Jackie months ago at Zale Lipsche Hospital in the ICU ward there, and then she was here at rehab, at Hendrick Rehab, and now she's home, and now she's at church. And I will tell you, it is a miracle that she is here. Addie Creason, same story this year. Max and Pam Paddock were in the early service. They were up in Amarillo over the holidays to be with their little boy, 7 foot 1 inch tall Chris Paddock, who's in his 40s now. I can't believe it. He was playing college basketball when I came as your pastor 20 years ago, and now he has his own family. But from July 10th until mid-November, he was in the hospital, mainly in Dallas. Worst case of pancreatitis they had ever seen in that hospital. And now he's home and he's eating and he's gaining health and gaining strength, and we are so grateful. Lots and lots of things to be thankful for, and Christmas miracles indeed. Have you found 1 Kings? Let's stand in honor of the reading of God's Word. 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. Then Rehoboam. Now Rehoboam is the son of King Solomon, and we'll explain this in just a little bit. Then Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now it came about when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard of it, for he was yet in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon while he was living in Egypt. They sent and called him. That Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke hard. Therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, and we will serve you. Then he said to them, Depart from me for 3 days, then return to me. So the people departed. King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, How do you counsel me to answer this people? Then they spoke to him, saying, If you will be a servant to this people today, will serve them, grant them their petition, and speak good words to them, they will be your servants forever. May God add His richest blessings to this, the reading of His Word. And now may His Holy Spirit apply the preaching and the teaching of His Word to our hearts this day. Please be seated. It's great having our sons home for Christmas, Bill and Hogan. And then Bill's family, Mallory and our 2 grandchildren, my sister and one of her sons were with us. There were 9 of us together on Christmas morning, a great celebration. I'm reminded every time I'm with both of my boys together how different they are. They're so much alike in terms of values and of course, memories shared, and a lot of that makes us alike. But they are also very different. When they were little babies, when Bill was born, he's 26 months older than Hogan, 33 and 31 respectively now. When Bill was born, he never wanted to go to sleep at night. And we had to walk. A rocking chair didn't do any good. We had to walk him and walk him and walk him. And if he saw light anywhere, he was awake, totally awake. And you had to start the whole process over. So you couldn't watch TV while you're walking him. You just had to get in the dark and just walk. And finally, after about 45 minutes, he would give up the ghost, is what we called it. And we would just kind of lean him over and carefully place him in the crib and then back away. And if the floor creaked at all, his head would pop up and the whole process had to start over again. Hogan, 26 months later, I thought, oh, here we go again. Hogan would reach for the crib. It was wonderful. It was a blessing. He loved sleep. He still does. And he would just reach for the crib. It was great. When they were in high school, they were so different. Again, same values, but very different. Bill was very studious. If he was having a bunch of guys over during the middle of the week, it was always for study group. They would get the furniture in the living room and push it all to the walls, and they would have the whole floor to themselves, and they would get out their science project or history project or whatever it is they were working on, and they would be getting ready to present that back at school the next day. If Hogan had a group of friends over during the week, it was always for pay-per-view wrestling. That was their deal, and Hogan just loved that. When they got to Baylor, they were in the same fraternity, and their fraternity brothers would say to me, "We can't believe they're brothers. They look different. They act different. They're just 2 different guys." Bill majored in economics. Hogan majored in film and digital media. They both had the exact grade point average when they graduated, but Hogan in film and digital media. And I remember that first semester that he was in Baylor, he came home and he said, "Dad, have you ever seen the film Singing in the Rain?" And I said, you talking about Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor and Debbie Reynolds, that singing? "Yeah, Dad." I said, "Well, yeah, about 50 years ago." He said, "Dad, I think it's my favorite movie of all time." I looked at my son and thought, what alien has abducted this kid? I mean, he was into Wolverine and the Hulk and Spider-Man and all the Marvel characters. And now he's in love with this movie, Singing in the Rain. I said, "Hogan, where did you see Singing in the Rain?" He said, "Oh, in film class. We watch films all the time. We watch movies all the time, and then we write critiques on it." I said, "Hogan, I'm paying $300 a semester hour for you to go to Baylor, and you're watching movies in class. That's it." He said, "Yeah, that is great." I said, "Yeah, I would have thought it was great too if that's all I did when I was in college, is watch a bunch of movies and critique them." Then this weekend, I went to see the new Mary Poppins movie. And by the time I paid for my ticket, popcorn and Dr. Pepper, I'd paid about that same amount of money for the film. So I guess it evens out over the years. But in those film critiques that Hogan had to submit, there were generally 6 categories. And this is not just in film, but it's in plays. It's in any stories that you read. There's generally 6 things that you critique in a story. And this morning, I want to give you those 6 criteria, and then let's apply them to our text for the day. The first is setting. The setting. That's the place and the circumstances where the story takes place, where the story unfolds. In the Mary Poppins movie, you know right away, it's going to be London. Because Jack, the lamplighter, sings the first song, Under the London Sky. That's the setting, London. Characters, that's the second criteria. Who are the main characters in the story? Now, obviously, Mary Poppins, it's Mary Poppins and it's the Banks family. When it comes to the third criteria, that's the point of view. From whose point of view is the story being told? It's not always easy to figure that out, but in the Mary Poppins movie, it's probably Jack who is the lamplighter. In the first one, it was Bert, played by Dick Van Dyke, who was the chimney sweep, and he kind of narrated things. The fourth criteria is plot. These are the actions that take place that cause the primary conflict in the film. And I'm not going to tell you any more about Mary Poppins in case you haven't seen it yet. But there's conflict there, and that's the plot. Then you have, fifth, resolution. The resolution. The story is brought to some conclusion. The conflict is being resolved either positively or negatively. Then finally, you have the theme of the movie or the theme of the story. Every great movie has an overarching theme. Shawshank Redemption, obviously, the theme there is redemption. The movie Jaws had an overarching theme. It is, as far as I interpret it, don't swim in the ocean. That's the theme of Jaws. Just do not go in the ocean. Here's the setting for our text that we just read a moment ago. It's toward the end of King Solomon's reign. Actually, King Solomon now has died, and his son Rehoboam is about to take control of the kingdom of Israel. Israel is one of the greatest, strongest nations on earth at the end of King Solomon's reign. But toward the latter years, and he reigned for 40 years, toward the latter years of his reign, Solomon became very aggressive with building projects. Huge buildings as well as ships. And to pay for all of that, he overtaxed the people. He put a heavy burden on them. He also forced them to participate in labor. Much labor required to build all the buildings and build all the ships. Solomon, after serving for 40 years as king, dies, and the throne is passed on to Rehoboam, his son. You read about that in the closing verses of 1 Kings chapter 11. So King Saul is the first king of Israel. He disobeyed God. The throne was taken from him. David becomes the next king, and God makes a covenant with David that your kingdom will go on forever. And of course, we know through Jesus, the son of David, one of the great-grandsons of David, the line of Judah continues, and his kingdom will go on forever. David's son is Solomon, second child born to Bathsheba, and then you have Rehoboam, and this is where our story picks up. Rehoboam is about to take control of the kingdom. Who are the main characters in this part of the story? Well, the main characters, first of all, Rehoboam. He is of the tribe of Judah, Solomon's son. He's about to become king, or now he is king. Second, we have Jeroboam. You read about him there in verses 2, 3, and 4. Jeroboam is from the tribe of Ephraim. Now, you get the sense that naming a child with Boam at the end of it was a cool thing to do in that day. You got Jeroboam, you got Rehoboam. We would have Jephboam and Daniaboam and Stanselaboam and Davidaboam. And I know you're dying to say your name with Boam at the end of it. So on the count of 3, everybody just say your own name with Boam at the end of it. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I love it. I love it. Bababoam is one of my favorite. I think Bababoam just sounds so cool. But we first learned about Jeroboam in the previous chapter, chapter 11, where he is described as one of the officers in Solomon's army. Scripture says he was a valiant warrior. He was a successful person. He was industrious, extremely capable. Solomon put him in charge of all of the forced labor. But even though he was in charge of that forced labor, the people seemed to like him. He treated them well, not like slaves, but like people. A prophet named Ahijah came to him in chapter 11 and said, "You are going to become the king of Israel." In fact, Ahijah took off his cloak and tore it into 12 pieces, each piece representing one of the tribes of Israel. And he gave him 10 pieces of that cloak and said, "You will rule over 12, or rather 10 of the 12 tribes. You will be their king, but not now." Unfortunately, one of Jeroboam's spiritual gifts was not the gift of patience. He just couldn't wait. And so he instigates a rebellion against Solomon while Solomon is still alive. And Solomon decides, "I'm going to kill him." And so Jeroboam hightails it to Egypt, and he's in exile in Egypt at the time of Solomon's death. And so that's the two main characters that we have in this portion of the story, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Now let's move to the point of view. Point of view. There was a story that came, a film that was released in 2008 called Vantage Point, starring Dennis Quaid and Forrest Whitaker. The movie was about an assassination plot to kill the President of the United States that takes place in Spain. The President is visiting Spain for some kind of summit or some kind of get-together. And the movie is shown from the vantage point of about 4 different characters. In other words, the same event is shown 4 different times from 4 different vantage points. Each angle brings the viewer a different insight on what really happened. It's a very creative and effective way of telling the story. Well, in the Bible, virtually every story in the Bible has 2 different points of view, or 2 different vantage points. There is the lower story point of view, and there's the upper story point of view. The lower story is how we see the story unfold. The upper story is how God sees the story unfold. Let me start with the lower story point of view, how it could have been written up in the Abilene Reporter News or the Jerusalem Post or Jerusalem Gazette. Here's the plot. When Solomon dies, Jeroboam, who's been exiled to Egypt, begins to think, this would be a good time to go back to Israel. And I'll sit down with the new king, Rehoboam. Solomon, his father, has died, and I'll sit down with the new king, and I'll make the case for the people. I'll plead on their behalf for the king to lighten up, to relieve the people of their heavy taxation, to relieve the people of their forced labor. So when he stands before the king, here's what he says in verse 4 of our text. Your father made our yoke hard. Therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam says to Jeroboam, give me 3 days to think about that. During those 3 days, he goes to his council of elders. These were the older counselors who had counseled his father during his father's 40-year reign. They're wise. They are experienced. And I love the way the Scripture reports their advice given to Rehoboam. Verse 7 says, then they spoke to him saying, if you will be a servant to this people today, we'll serve them. Grant them their petition and speak good words to them. Then they will be your servants forever. In other words, if you won't treat your subjects as slaves, but treat them as people, they're going to be loyal to you. They're going to serve you for as long as you sit upon the throne. Well, does Rehoboam take their advice? No, he does not. Instead, he turns to a group of young men that he's grown up with who are now serving him. And it's just a crazy idea because they're inexperienced and they're young, and he's demonstrating poor leadership here. They are totally set up to tell the king what he wants to hear. And essentially they say, you make the people's yoke even harder. Look at verses 10 and 11. And the young men who grew up with him, that is with Rehoboam, spoke to him saying, thus you shall say to this people who spoke to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us. But you shall speak to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's loins or my father's waist. Whereas my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. And Rehoboam decides to take the advice of these younger, inexperienced men. And that's the plot that initiates conflict that's going to last for the next 200 years. Well, let's consider the resolution. How is this conflict resolved? Is it resolved positively? Is it resolved negatively? Well, it's resolved by the nation of Israel being torn in two. Torn asunder. Divided. Jeroboam takes 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel and moves to the north and forms a brand new nation. And he calls it the nation of Israel. And he is their king. Their capital is at Shechem. He does exactly what the prophet Ahijah had said he would do. Rehoboam remains king over the two tribes of Judah and Benjamin. Judah being the line of his father Solomon and grandfather David. And he rules over the southern kingdom, which becomes known as Judah. Now it gets a little tricky here because we're in the next 200 years of Hebrew history and Israel's history. When we read the name Israel, we're talking about the northern kingdom, where the 10 tribes are living. The southern kingdom is called Judah. Northern kingdom, Jeroboam is the king. And there will be 9 different dynasties that rule over the next 200 years. 3 different capitals. The first one at Shechem, and then they move to Tirzah, and eventually to the city of Samaria. And after 200 years, the northern kingdom, as you recall, will be conquered by the Assyrians. They'll come in and they will completely destroy them in war, and they will take many of the people as exiles up to Assyria and to other places that the Assyrians rule. And that's where we get that term, the lost tribes of Israel, the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They're never really heard from again. Down in the south, the southern kingdom, ruled by initially Jeroboam, there will be just one family line. Not 9 dynasties, but one. All of the kings will be descendants of David. Some of them will be good kings, some of them will be bad kings. When we talk about good kings, bad kings, from a biblical perspective, we're talking about godly kings, ungodly kings. There are no good kings in the northern kingdom for those 200 years. There are some good kings in the southern kingdom. And it will have just one capital, and that will be the capital of Jerusalem, the capital city. It will last for about 350 years before eventually being conquered by the Babylonians. Now, to the theme. What is the overarching theme of this story? Well, the theme is actually found in the New Testament. In Mark's Gospel, the 3rd chapter, the 25th verse says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." That's the theme of the story we read in 1 Kings. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Jesus spoke those words in the Gospels when he was in his hometown of Nazareth. He had cast a demon out of a demon-possessed man, and some of the people said, "My goodness, what a miracle. God is here in our midst. The kingdom of God has arrived. He's doing all these miracles." But some of the people, particularly the scribes who were the keepers of the law and wanted to maintain status quo, said, "Oh, this man's not of God," speaking of Jesus. "This man is in league with the devil." Beelzebub is what they called him. "And he's casting out demons by the power of Satan." And Jesus just laughed. He said, "Even Satan is smart enough to know that if he casts out his own forces, his enterprise is going to collapse." So Jesus says, not only is your theology faulty, but your reasoning is faulty. If it was true that Jesus is casting out Satan by the power of Satan, then Satan is actually fighting against himself. And any house, any kingdom that does that will not stand. So Jesus says a house divided against itself will fall. He also says a kingdom divided against itself will fall. He says surely Satan is smarter than that. And he is. But evidently, we're not. Because we humans do this all the time. I heard a man say this week, life is hard enough just dealing with outside influences. It's plumb crazy that people in the same family, people on the same team would turn on each other. That house, Jesus said, is going to fail. And fail it did. That once mighty nation that God had built from scratch, that was the talk of the ancient world, unstoppable in every way, has now been severely weakened, not by some outside force or outside enemy, but from within. And we see the same thing happening. Families, teams, churches, neighborhoods, cities, today. Over 43 years now in the ministry, I have counseled with families that have fallen apart, or maybe more accurately it should be said, they've blown apart. And a year or 2 years before, you would have looked at that family and said, "My goodness, that's the picture of solidarity. That's the picture of a strong family. That's the picture of a family that just loves each other." But now parents won't talk to children. Children won't talk to one another. Brothers won't talk to brothers. Sisters won't talk to sisters. And it's not because someone outside the family somehow infiltrated the family and injected everybody with poison. It's just because somebody in the family got greedy. Somebody in the family became lustful. Somebody in the family became selfish. When I was pastor in DeRidder, Louisiana, before coming to Abilene, right 3 blocks down the street was Hickson's Funeral Home. And the undertaker there was not only an undertaker, but he was also Justice of the Peace. So he carried a badge. He said, "Stan, you wouldn't believe how many times this badge has come in handy at the funeral home. You wouldn't believe the number of fights that have broken out. I'm talking fist fights, wrestling matches, in the viewing room, right in front of Grandpa's casket, right in front of Mama's body, Mama's casket. Brothers, sisters fighting, yelling at each other over who's going to pay for what, or who's not going to pay for what, or who's going to get Grandpa's shotgun, who's going to get Daddy's pickup truck, who's going to get the dog, who's going to get Mama's bedroom furniture. Jesus reminds us that Satan has come to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And sometimes all he has to do is lead astray one member of a Sunday school class, one member of a choir, one member of a youth group, one member of a deacon fellowship, one member of a church staff, one member of a family, one member of a team, of a faculty. Don't you be that person. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, not blessed are the peace breakers. When we're divided within, eventually we crumble. That's the theme of the lower story that we're reading. But when we come to the point of view from the upper story and look at it from God's perspective, the plot unfolds in a completely different way. Looking on this story from above, we're told that when Rehoboam decided not to listen to his elders and not to listen to the people, 1 Kings 12 verse 15 says, this turn of events was from the Lord. It was from God. After Jeroboam rallied this huge insurrection against the king and successfully led 10 of Israel's 12 tribes to secede from that united kingdom, King Rehoboam mustered 180,000 young men from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and he was going to attack their relatives in the north, just like the Civil War in America. He was going to take those two tribes and do war with their 10 cousin tribes to the north. But God intervened. And God issued this message to them in 1 Kings 12:24 that stopped them in their tracks. Thus said the Lord, you must not go up and fight against your relatives. The word relatives there is literally the word brothers. You must not fight against your brothers, the sons of Israel. Return every man to his house. For this thing, this division of the kingdom has come from me. Now it appears from the lower story that all this conflict arose when Rehoboam refused to listen to the counsel of his elders and ignored the pleas of his people. And God certainly used that human event, but the ultimate cause was God. The ultimate cause is the Lord, and that leads us to an even greater theme in the upper story, and that is a house divided against God cannot stand. God made this decision way back when Solomon was king. Solomon let his many foreign wives. You remember Solomon was married, had 700 wives, 300 mistresses. Many of those marriages were with women who were the daughters of kings of other nations. And he was solidifying treaties that he had made with these other nations by marrying these foreign women. Well, when they came to live in Jerusalem, came to live in Israel, they brought their foreign gods with them. And they said to their husbands, "Oh, if you love me, honey, you've got this beautiful temple that you built to your God. Surely you'll build a temple that I can worship my God in." And so Solomon did. He built houses of worship and idols right next to the very places where Jehovah was being worshipped. A house divided against God cannot stand. And here's what we learn from the last chapter of the story in Solomon's life. Solomon so diluted the worship of God. He began to worship these foreign gods, and that led the nation to worship these foreign gods. Turn back a page to the 11th chapter of 1 Kings, beginning at verse 9. 1 Kings 11:9. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not observe what the Lord had commanded. So the Lord said to Solomon, verse 11, "Because you have done this and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant." Speaking of Jeroboam. "Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." It may seem harsh on God's part, but you've been reading the story. We've been following God's dealings with Israel since the very beginning, since the calling of Abraham. And we know, we have seen time and again how patient God has been with His people. Time and again, God has kept His part of the covenant, His part of the promise. But Israel has not. God's been blessing Israel, expanding their territory, giving them power and prestige among the nations, but Israel has not done what she promised to do. Solomon so diluted and distorted their worship of God with the worship of other gods that nobody in the world would give credit to God for the wonderful things that Israel had done. Israel was completely distorting the upper story plan of God, which was to reveal God's promise. Israel was supposed to reveal God's promise and God's power and God's presence and God's plan to win the nations back to Himself, to restore the fellowship that had been forfeited in the Garden of Eden because of man's sin. And this severe weakening of the nation into two would finally make sense to the outsiders looking on when they observed all the facts. As long as Israel was honoring God, God blessed them. But when Israel ceased to honor God and divided their loyalties with other gods and other interests, they were weakened. Now, the movie comes to a close. But we know there's more. It's just like the trilogy, Lord of the Rings. There's a sequel. We know there's more coming. But for now, the credits in this part of the movie begin to roll. We can get up and we can go to the car, or we can sit still for a moment in the theater, in the sanctuary, and ponder the power of both themes in our own lives. In the lower story, a house divided against itself cannot stand. We need to make certain that we're doing our part to keep peace. At home, at church, on the campus, at work, in the neighborhood, in the city, in our land. In the upper story, a kingdom or a house divided against God cannot stand. To experience the full blessings of God, to ensure that all things are going to work together for God to bring good into our lives, then we need to make certain that we're loving God above all. As our church mission statement says, that we're loving God supremely. And we need to make certain that we are aligning our lives with that upper story of God, God's plan, God's purpose. So before we get up to throw away that empty bag that contained our popcorn, or in my case, the jug that contained the popcorn, before we begin to fish around for our keys and our cell phone, and go out to the car to drive home, I think we need to whisper this prayer to God. Dear God, thank you for your provision in my life. Today I stand fully devoted to you. I don't want to be the cause of division in my home or my church, my school, at work or on my team, in my neighborhood, this city. I want there to be peace and unity in my lower story. And truly, God, I don't want there to be division with you in the upper story. Give me the strength, give me the will to make good on that commitment. If that could be your New Year's prayer, would you bow your head with me and let's pray that prayer together. We pray it silently in our hearts as I pray it out loud. Dear God, we look back on the past year and we see your hand at work even when we weren't aware of it, and we give thanks. Thank you for your provision in our lives. We make this personal. Today I stand fully devoted to you. God, I don't want to be the cause of division in my home, my church, my neighborhood, my work, my city, or my country. I want there to be peace and unity in my lower story. And truly, Father, I don't want there to be division with you in my upper story, my relationship with you. Give me the strength, give me the will to make good on that promise and that commitment. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Would you stand with me? When I was a kid, my dad died when I was 8. My mom remarried. We moved from Brownwood to California, Southern California. I inherited 4 more sisters. Already had one. They were older than I. It was the 60s. It was California. It was a tough time to be raising teenagers anywhere. And I think the blended family always adds some challenges to that. It was not a peaceful household. My parents did everything to make it peaceful, but sometimes a family member or several can just not want there to be peace. And it was a tough 8-10 years growing up there. I remarked to Claudia this week as our family was here together, it's so wonderful when there's no conflict. It's so wonderful when there's no drama. It's no wonder that the psalmist said how beautiful it is for brothers to dwell together in unity, for families to dwell together. That's what God wants. Christ came not just to make peace. Scripture says He is our peace. He came to tear down, brick by ugly brick, the walls that divide us from one another. And in light of the cross, of why Jesus died, how ridiculous it is for us to insist on walls to divide us. Peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. As we sing in a moment, God's leading in your heart to make commitment public for Christ today. This is a time to respond. We're going to sing the song, I Surrender All. Surrender your will to God's upper plan for 2019. And you'll be amazed the blessings that God brings to you and to others because of that commitment. Let's sing together.